which was surprising to me because during that time I was like, wow, I'm like missing home. I was like, this is a vibe. It kind of clicked on me. You know what? I think I'm like kind of depressed right now. What's up, y'all? Michelle URL here, and today we're going to talk about 10 things that I learned while traveling outside of the country for 30 consecutive days. Okay, so in May, I spent a couple weeks in Mexico and then went to El Salvador and spent a couple weeks. And one thing that I have begun to realize as I travel, especially outside of the country, is just how much I learn. Not only about myself, but just learn through the experience of navigating a world outside of America. Here's 10 things that kept kind of coming up for me while I was traveling. And also when I got back, I was reflecting on, and these are some things that stood out to me. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. So, basically, what this is, it is a free service to allow US citizens and nationals traveling and living abroad to enroll their trip with the nearest US embassy or consulate. So, I had never heard of this before. And basically, how I stumbled upon this is I was doing some research on the areas that I was visiting, which I would hope people do research when they travel outside of the country. I know I haven't in the past, but it is important to like know what you're getting into. It helps you stay informed about potential disasters, civil unrest, any sort of emergencies that might arise in the area that you're going to be staying in. They'll notify you. This program also helps facilitate communication between you and your family. Again, if something crazy happens, the Bitcoiner in me was like, you know what? I don't need the government knowing all my business. Like, I don't need people knowing everything about what I'm doing and where I'm staying. But the American woman part of me was like, hey, I need everybody knowing where I'm at. I need trackers on me, right? Especially since I was traveling solo for most of this trip. I know if you have a family like mine and you're traveling outside of the country, all the crazy stuff will start going through their mind about you getting kidnapped and like all this crazy stuff. So when I told my family that I had enrolled in this program and that, you know, these US embassies and consulates knew about my trip, that helped ease their mind and also helped ease my mind as well. Just something I think is really important to consider, especially if you're a solo traveler. Another thing that stood out to me, so I stayed 2 weeks in Mexico and 2 weeks in El Salvador. But when I was in Mexico, I split that 2 weeks. I spent like 5 days in Tulum and the rest of my time in Playa del Carmen. So, what I realized now, Tulum wasn't all that in a bag of chips for me. I was ready to leave Tulum after like my 5 days there. But when I went to Playa del Carmen, I was like, this is a vibe. This is a vibe. And when I was in Playa del Carmen, I was like tapped into the dance scene there, you know, bachata, salsa, things of that nature. And I was like starting to get to know people and I was making connections. And just when I was like feeling the vibe and starting to getting to know people, I had to leave to go to El Salvador, right? So what I'm realizing is next time, at minimum, want to plan to stay at least 2 weeks in a spot before I leave or go somewhere else. Staying somewhere like 5 days or a week, it's just not ideal, especially if you're working remotely as well, because on top of all that, you're 8 hours of your day you're working remotely, and so you only have the evenings to go out and see the area and meet people, and then you may have one weekend to do excursions or tours and things of that nature. So if you stay 2 weeks or more at least you have 2 weekends where you can see the area and plan your activities. So next time I do this, and I really like that 30-day time period, but the next time I do it, I might pick two places only and just spend my time 2 weeks in one place and then maybe go to another place for another 2 weeks, or spend a full 4 weeks in one place. And also, if you do that, it helps ease the fatigue of having to constantly be moving, because it really does get tiring packing, unpacking, getting in a bus, getting in a taxi, getting in a flight, getting off a flight, finding your hotel. Like, that can get really taxing, which kind of goes into my next point of 30 days being just enough time for me. This is the longest I've traveled ever, 30 days straight not being home. And what I learned is that 30 days was just enough, because to my surprise, around week 3.5, going into my fourth week, I really started to miss home. Which was surprising to me, because during that time I was like, wow, I'm like missing home. It was surprising to me, which is actually beautiful that I felt that way, because that means that I really do like where I'm at and the relationships that I am building where I currently live. So it was a beautiful experience actually to miss home. I'm glad I had that feeling. Now I know if I do this in the future, 30 days is the perfect amount of time for me to experience these other places, but not get too homesick and not get to a point where I'm missing home too much, right? So 30 days. Another thing that I did this time was all one-way flights. Every single flight that I booked was a one-way flight. And what this gave me was flexibility. So, for example, I flew into Cancun, went to Tulum for a little bit, then took the bus back up to Playa del Carmen. And then from when I was in Playa del Carmen, I actually had the choice to either stay there longer or to leave when I had originally planned. So since I didn't book my flight, I wasn't tied to a timeline. However, on the flip side, I did book my hotel already in El Salvador, which was my next stop. So that still kind of affected my timeline in a little bit, because I didn't want to stay in Playa del Carmen. And then I'm kind of like wasting money because I already booked my hotel in El Salvador. But you get the point, right? Being able to just book one-way flights and also not book them so in advance to where you're still able to kind of control your timeline is something that I'll do in the future. Like, so for example, when I was in Playa del Carmen, I booked my flight for El Salvador the day before the flight. And it didn't affect the price or anything. Of course, you have to watch out for that. But again, it allowed for flexibility. The next thing that I learned, I was using a lot of this translator app. It comes on iPhone, I believe. It's called Translate or Translator. And so I was using this a lot to translate things. And so one thing that I didn't realize until 2 weeks into my trip is that you can actually download the languages onto your phone and use them and still use the translator app when you don't have internet service. So the first half of my trip, I would be in a situation where I didn't have internet service, and then I couldn't use my translator app because I didn't know I could download the languages. And then another thing that I learned, this was like week 3 into my trip, I was typing things and translating things on my phone. So I would have a phrase in English that I was trying to communicate to someone who only spoke Spanish, right? And then that Spanish translation, I was trying to speak it to the person, and the person wouldn't understand because my pronunciation is horrible. I'm still learning Spanish, right? And I didn't realize until like week 3, when my taxi driver was only spoke Spanish, I noticed that he would do the translation and then play the audio of the translation. So, long story short, there, if you're translating stuff and then having to speak it or communicate it to somebody, don't even try to pronounce it. Like, don't even try to speak it. Just play the audio directly from the translator app, and then they'll understand. Another thing that I realized, particularly in Playa del Carmen, is how much I love walkability. For most of my life, I've lived in areas where I have to travel in a car for like 15 plus minutes just to get anywhere, just to go to the grocery store, just to go to the gym, just to, it's like 15 minutes to get anywhere. And when I went to Playa del Carmen, what I loved about the area so much is that everything is walkable. So where I stayed, you walk around the corner, there's a coffee shop. You walk a couple blocks this way, there's restaurants, there's grocery stores. You walk a few miles that way, and it's the nightlife. Everything is within a walkable distance. Playa del Carmen, put that on your list, y'all. It's a vibe. The next thing, traveling with just a carry-on. So after my last trip out of the country where I checked a bag, this big suitcase, I was like, I'm never doing this again. If I don't absolutely have to check a bag, I'm not going to do it again because it's a lot. It's a lot, when you're moving around, you're getting in and out of a taxi, you're changing hotels, and you got to go through the airport, and got to get searched and this, that, and the other. Having a check bag, it just becomes a nuisance. And so going into this trip, I was like, I'm only carrying a carry on. I had a personal bag, a backpack. I had a crossbody smaller bag that I wore. And then I also packed a sling bag, like if I were to go hiking or something like that. That's all I needed. So moving forward, you won't catch me with a check bag if I don't need it. Yeah, it was really nice just to be able to get on the plane and get off with no hassle or trying to wait for check luggage to come through and pick up the luggage. There was none of that for me, and it was a beautiful experience, especially if you're in some of these areas. Like for in Tulum, we had to walk from the bus station to the hotel, and it's hot and there's gravel and the sidewalks are uneven, and it's just like it was really nice to not have that extra baggage on me. Another thing that kept coming up for me while I was away is that I noticed how peaceful it was. And I've kept thinking on how the best way to articulate this, but being in America, you turn on the news, it's like always something. Politics, it's a total clown show. Like it's just a lot, right? And not to say that America isn't a good country, and not to say that these other countries don't have their own problems, because of course they do. But it was really peaceful to just disconnect from America for a little bit, and just disconnect from American problems. And it was just peaceful. I think part of that disconnecting, of course, was I wasn't on social media as much. I wasn't, watching the news or on YouTube as much, which you can do in America. You can disconnect in that way. But I think it just took it to another whole level to actually remove myself and put myself in another country, in another area, and completely have that separation. So hopefully that makes sense. Another thing that became apparent to me, and I noticed this once I transitioned from Mexico into El Salvador, is just how convenient Bitcoin is, and how convenient Bitcoin Lightning is. For those of you all who don't know, Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador. So when I was in El Salvador, 99% of my purchases were in Bitcoin. My payments were in Bitcoin. And so when I was in Mexico, I was carrying around wads of cash. I had to go to the currency exchange. I was trying to find ATMs to get more cash out because you run out of cash. And then you're pulling out these wads of these wads of cash trying to pay people. It's a lot. And then so making that transition from there and then going into El Salvador where all I had to do was pull out my phone, scan a QR code, pay, I'm done. It's like, wow, that was easy. That was very convenient. And last but not least, this one kind of caught me off guard, but post travel blues is real. Post, whether you want to say post travel blues or post travel depression, whatever you want to call it, it's real. So when I got back, and again, I was actually excited to come back because I was missing home, right? But when I got back, I started feeling just off, and I'm like, why am I feeling off? And this is like about 4 days being back after my trip. And it kind of clicked on me, you know what? I think I'm like kind of depressed right now. And then I started thinking about it and reflecting on it. And I was like, you know what? I just went through, I just went from having 30 days of excitement, adrenaline, dopamine. Here I am meeting all of these people across the world. Here I am going from being on the beach every other day, having my feet in the sand every day, being outside in the sun, sitting poolside. I'm walking everywhere, right? So I'm feeling healthy. I'm eating all this fresh food. I'm, basically engulfed in this new experience and the high of this new experience of traveling for 30 days. And then I come back home and I'm back to normal, if you will. I'm back to not going outside as much, and I'm not getting that sunlight. I don't have my shoes off where I'm like walking in the sand here, right? So that transition and that shift really affected me. So I think that's something to maybe pay attention to and to plan for, especially if you're going to be out of the country and away from home that long, right? Maybe after a week you won't feel it, but after 30 days and coming back to normal, um I really had to get myself out of that feeling. I was like, man, I need to make sure I get sunlight like I was getting back in Mexico and El Salvador. I was like, I need to get out of the house, I need to go to coffee shops, I need to do something because yeah, the excitement really plummeted when I got back. That's all I have for you. Hopefully, maybe you picked something that was beneficial to you out of this, but this was really more of a piece for me to reflect and share. And that's all I have for you. See you in the next one.